He asked his wife for a divorce, but her response was a lesson that we will never forget. Hey guys, today's story is about a man who wanted to divorce his wife, but that was the wrong decision in his life. He says, "I got home that night and found my wife preparing dinner. I approached her, held her hand and said, 'I've got something to tell you.' She sat down quietly. I noticed the confused look on her face. Suddenly, I didn't know what to say. I just couldn't open my mouth to speak, but I had to let her know what I was thinking. 'I want a divorce,' I said calmly. She didn't seem annoyed by my words. She didn't even react at first. We didn't talk to each other, and she went to bed in tears. I knew she wanted to find out what had happened to our marriage, but I could hardly give her an answer. How could I tell my wife of 10 years that I'd fallen in love with someone else? With a deep sense of guilt, I drafted a divorce agreement that stated she could own our house, our car, and 30% ownership of my company. I thought it would make her pleased, but once I showed it to her, she glanced at it and tore it into pieces. Honestly, I felt sorry for her. I was sad about how she felt, but I couldn't take back what I already said. I'd fallen in love with Jane, who worked at my company. Finally, she cried loudly in front of me, which was what I expected to see. Seeing her crying at last was a bit of a release. The idea of divorce, which had obsessed me for several weeks now, seems to be clearer now. The next day, I came back home very late after spending the evening with Jane and found Amy, my wife, sitting at the dining table writing something. I didn't know what to say, so I went straight to bed and fell asleep. In the morning, she presented her divorce conditions. She didn't want anything worldly from me. She requested that during the next 30 days, we both work to live as usual as possible. Her reasons were simple. Our son had his exams in a month, and she didn't want to disrupt him with such terrible news. Of course, I agreed to this condition, but she had something else in mind. She asked if I remembered our wedding day and how I'd carried her into the bridal room over the threshold that night. She requested that every day, I pick her up and take her out of our bedroom to the front door every morning for the next month's duration. I thought she was going crazy to make our last days together bearable, but I accepted her odd request. I immediately told Jane about my wife's divorce conditions. She laughed it off and thought it was absurd. Jane said Amy would have to face the divorce no matter what trick she was trying to play. Amy and I hadn't had any physical contact since the night I told her of my affair with Jane and my plans to divorce her, so when I carried her out on the first day, we both appeared clumsy and awkward. Our son clapped behind us, cheering, "Daddy's holding mommy in his hands." His words made me feel sad, but I continued carrying her from the bedroom to the living room, then to the front door. Before I put her down, she whispered, "Don't tell our son about the divorce." I nodded in agreement, feeling somewhat upset. I put her down outside the door. We both headed off to work. The next day, as I carried her through the house, I felt that we were both a little more relaxed. She leaned on my chest and I could smell the fragrance of her perfume on her blouse. I realized I hadn't looked at this woman closely for a long time. I realized she wasn't young anymore. There were fine wrinkles on her face and her hair was starting to turn gray. For a moment, I felt guilty. I thought about what I'd done to her. On the fourth day, when I lifted her, I felt a sense of intimacy returning. This woman had given 10 years of her life to our son and I. She's a very important person in my life. On the 5th and 6th days, I realized I still loved her, but I didn't share my thoughts with either Jane or Amy. I also noticed it became easier to carry her day after day. Perhaps the daily workout made me stronger. One morning, as we were getting dressed for work, Amy mentioned she struggled with what to wear. She tried on quite a few dresses, but nothing fit as it did before because she'd lost so much weight. It was then I suddenly realized she'd grown so thin. That was the reason I could carry her more easily. A few moments later, our son came into the bedroom and said, "Dad, it's time to bring Mom to the front door." To him, seeing his father carrying his mother had become an essential part of his everyday routine. My wife gestured to our son to come closer. She hugged him tightly and looked at me. I turned my face away because I was afraid of the feelings I was having. I then picked her up and carried her through the house. She wrapped her hands gently around my neck, so softly and naturally, I held her tightly and found myself feeling the way I felt on our wedding day. On the last day of the month, I could hardly move a step when I held her in my arms. Her weight loss now made me sad and concerned. I held her tightly and said, "I'm so sorry. I hadn't noticed that our life lacked real intimacy at the moment." I quickly drove to the office, jumped out of the car, and headed straight to Jane's office. I opened her door and said very clearly, "I'm sorry, Jane, but I don't want to divorce my wife anymore. I still love her, and I've realized over the last 30 days that I carried her into my home on our wedding day and was supposed to stay by her side until death do us part, and that's what I'm going to do. As I quickly left the office, I immediately drove straight to the flower shop. I purchased a bouquet for my wife and I wrote something for her on a red card. I'll carry you every morning till death do us part. That evening I arrived home, flowers in my hand and a smile on my face. I felt so alive with my renewed love for my wife. As I ran upstairs to our bedroom, I found Amy. I found my wife lying in our bed dead. My wife had been fighting cancer for months, but I was so busy with Jane I didn't even notice. She knew that she would die soon, and that's why her final request was so important to her. She wanted to ensure that her son would see me, his dad, as a loving husband, carrying his mom gently to the front door every day. This incredible story shows how we must know the value of what we have before losing it. Now you know, it's time to be your partner's best friend and do the things they love before it is too late. Thank you for watching. I hope you liked today's video. Please don't forget to leave a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any new stories.